on September 29th, 2020. This is the meeting of the Economic Development Committee. And we'll start the meeting with attendance on the chairperson, John Rock. We have Michelle Weiss in the audience, Vice Mayor, the Economic Development Director, Susan Drucker, our Mayor, Michael Brennan, and Councilwoman Sandra Berry, and we have a couple other people in the audience as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. First item on the agenda is the Small Business Assistance Program, and I believe Ms. Drucker's prepared a remark on this. Okay.
So just to give the committee some background, when we first had distributions for COVID money, there were they had strict conditions of how that money could be distributed. So at the time, the way it was worded, then we were only allowed to use X amount for payroll and X amount for PPE, which means there could have been a possibility to have a balance of funds. And rather than return it, we said we would come up with some programs so that, because at the end of the day, we didn't want to have to return any money that the city would receive. So we want to at least have a use in place for it, knowing that anytime the language changed, because with COVID, every week we were getting different updates. They were making different requirements of how the money could be spent. So we understood that as the rules were becoming more relaxed with more money being allowed to be paid towards payroll, then maybe this wouldn't come to fruition. But we wanted to have programs in place just in case. So, it's not as if the rules were different when these programs were drafted and then ultimately by the time they got to council. Since they did arrive at council at the last council meeting, the requirements had changed dramatically, where now all of the money could be used towards payroll due to COVID related expenses, and then also all the PPE expenses. That being said, there was a second distribution, and then of course there's the discussions now of possibly a third distribution. So the program that's before you today was designed to assist the small businesses, to help our small businesses in University Heights mitigate some of the hardships that they have suffered and experienced due to the businesses having to be closed, and then the restrictions that were placed upon several of the businesses. And the program was targeted towards these for-profit companies that are located in University Heights, and it was to just make funds available with certain restrictions that it could be used for, whether these businesses had some issues with, maybe they had to cover a gap with employee wages and benefits, some rent, some utilities, PPE equipment themselves. And just to sidetrack a little, we did receive some masks from Destination Cleveland. So in cooperation with the mayor and Destination Cleveland, I did distribute those to the businesses just as in case. That's when the rules were where stores were just opening up again. And then people could be cited if they weren't wearing a mask. So the idea was to give them to the businesses. So rather than turn a customer away who didn't have a mask, you offer them a mask, and it's a goodwill gesture. And businesses were very appreciative, because that's when the rules were all new about mandating the masks and stores reopening. So it could cover PPE equipment, and then also any modifications that stores, restaurants, any retail space had to implement to cooperate with the social distancing mandates, meaning whether they had to put up some plexiglass or spacing or what have you. So the program was designed as a grant and grants could be provided up to $5,000. When I put an amount or any dates I put in the grant, those were placeholders. Obviously they could be changed if council deems them needed to be changed, if this was a program that would get approved. But I just wanted to at least start a discussion point. But the key to this program was the eligibility requirements. And I want to bring this to your attention because I have, since the council meeting, Cleveland.com wrote an article, and I have received 4 inquiries. The problem is they're all from businesses that are not registered in our city. They may be located in our city, but they're not registered. And so the eligibility requirements are that the applicant must be a majority owner of a business. The business must have a physical location in the city of University Heights. The business must have been registered with the city of University Heights prior to March 23rd, 2020. And mind you, our registration for retail space and office space is an annual registration that all the businesses are aware that they need to go through. The business must be in good standing with the city of University Heights, meaning no tax delinquencies. And then they must have been in business in the city of University Heights at least for 12 months and have had positive revenue pre-COVID. And we use the date as March 23rd, 2020. So this isn't, so some people were reading the article and they were saying, oh, I want some of this money. How do I get it? And it's not that, this wasn't designed to just give money away. We have to make sure that these are businesses that if the city's going to help a business, it's to help keep them in operation in our city. And that's why we had these restrictions. A couple of the inquiries that I received were home-based businesses, and those are a lot of the businesses in our city that are home-based do not register with the city. I know of one that is registered. So that's why I put the home-based business legislation back on your agenda, not to get into the discussion tonight, but to say that we need a future meeting to address this, because the home-based businesses can't reap the benefits of any programming we offer if they're not even registered with the city. So, they have to be registered. We have to know so that we could also follow up that they're paying the taxes owed to the city, and doing our checks and balances as well. And then I listed some of the information that the businesses would need to provide, such as a lease or rental agreement for their location, their most recent certified and or signed payroll statement, a profit and loss statement from the period of March 23rd, 2020 to September 1st, 2020, and then also their profit and loss statement from March 23rd, 2019 to September 1st, 2019, because again, if you remember, one of the eligibility requirements is that we want to make sure that they've had positive revenue. And then their federal tax ID if applicable. And then of course I covered the funds what the assistance could be used for. And then following that was the application that any applicant would have to complete and return to the city to be considered for this grant. So that's pretty much the program outlined and the intent behind it. And I wanted to give you that timeline of how we came to this program.
Eligibility in terms of somebody asked for $5,000. Well, let's just not say we're going to only give them 1,000.
No, and the grant is up to. So that's why, in the application, they have to answer questions. Some of it has to do, they have to list how many full-time, how many part-time, how many temporary or seasonal employees. They go over what is their exact need for service. What were some of the challenges that they faced due to the closing of businesses. So they have to state this, and there's also a section that they have to state if they received any other assistance, because we want to know if they received some other form of funding. Because if the pot's only so big and you have two businesses that could generally, that maybe are eligible, but one of the other businesses already received some waivers or maybe some PPP funding or something of that nature, then maybe we help the business that hasn't received anything. But that's why there's that committee to talk these applications through. So that's why it could be up to. And then they also have to list their eligible expenses, meaning rent, machinery, equipment, utilities, salaries. So that's why I wanted to give an up to. And it also is very clear that just because you apply does not guarantee you money at all.
I think it's very well thought through. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
It would appear that we'll be getting additional CARES Act money if this next round of funding goes through. One projection I received was an additional $461,000.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is something we want to make a priority together with the other three, which aren't before this committee, but there are three others that I'm hopeful that Housing Committee will meet on shortly, for residents and consumers for assistance. I think this is something that would be appropriate for our city to be offering. There are other communities that are already done this. Lakewood was out on front with a similar program. Their round of funding that corresponds with what we would be doing here is in the neighborhood of $445,000. Obviously, they're a larger city, mm-hmm. with $7,000 to a business. Willoughby Hills is a considerably smaller city than ours, and they've dedicated $100,000 to a program like this, but they have a smaller per business cap of, I think, $2,000. I like our $5,000 cap for businesses. We have a lot of latitude there. It's not like anyone's guaranteed any particular amount. I know one number that we were batting about in-house was $60,000. That was even before we were aware that there may be an additional $461,000 coming. So maybe 60 is a little on the small side, but I do think that there is a need here in the city, even if we've only heard from some businesses that would not qualify at this point. I know that since the Cleveland.com article ran, we've heard, not only there, but also from residents who would be seeking assistance under the other programs. So I do think that this is an appropriate conduit for the city and a way of helping out our residents and making sure that while we are obviously wanting to shore up and take care of payroll issues and safety services and essential workers here in-house, that we make sure that we can look beyond the municipal grounds at what's around us, and that there is a need for assistance throughout the city.
Well, the other thing too to bring to the committee's attention is that all of the deadlines that's something else that changes often. And so now to encumber the funds has been moved to November 20th. Then to expense the funds, I believe, is February 6th.
Yeah, it's rolled over into the new
year. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean. It continues to change. But the one thing we need to probably, to really consider when we're looking at any of the programs or whatever the city's needs are for that CARES funding is, my guess is, once 2020 is over, there's no more CARES funding coming through. So this is something that obviously was a big boost to the city, just dealing with our own financial challenges this year. So, but if it's a matter of, again, these taking a little bit of a backseat, I completely understand that, but at least they're prepared and could be ready to go, at least from committee level, prior to council committing anything, to see what council and the mayor, what you all decide, what are the priorities of spending this money.
Mayor, on that 460 that you mentioned, is that the third distribution of funding?
Yes.
That would be a third one.
Okay, that one. Okay. So the first two we know are going towards the payroll.
Yes, primarily.
Okay. Well, then 460 is a pretty large chunk. Mm-hmm. That's what you're thinking it is.
If you look at the
yes, we did get a spreadsheet that had every county and every municipal entity listed, and we're down for 461. Now that has to hold through the process, but that's the current projection. Okay. And it's based upon population, so respond to your census.
And it does sound like it is a large amount of money, and obviously any city would be grateful for receiving that. But if you look at the budget too, payroll for just police and fire alone exceed that amount.
It is significant, yes.
It's so that's why I understand with council maybe to have your own conversations about how to prioritize before, you know, any final distribution. You know,
so we could set up a program before encumbering funds, and we have till November 20th, it sounds like, to get our ducks in a row, how we're going to encumber those additional funding dollars to be spent by February is what you're saying.
those are the new dates that I heard.
Yeah.
And until that's all confirmed, especially even until the 461,000 is confirmed, it's good to hear about that it's probably coming, and it probably will, but you know, until it's really here, we can't speak on it.
Right. I feel comfortable committing until we know what's coming.
Right.
But it sounds like we can at least get started with getting the ball rolling between now and November 20th, because there's 3 programs we wanted to discuss. One is in this committee, and the other 2, I think, are going to building.
Oh yeah, building housing. The other 3.
Building.
And it does give council some flexibility here with the timing, because the last time when it was presented, the deadline was October 15th, I believe. So we were it was a little crunch to say, hey, how are these funds going to be appropriated, but or encumbered, and so it does give some time before that. And plus, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you'd want to hear from the finance director as well, but at least everything is in motion and has gone through committee, so that if there was some money you were going to carve out for these programs, we've gotten the legwork done for it.
So who would make the decision then on awarding funds to companies or businesses in need, or which applicants? Who would make those decisions?
It would be an internal committee, and as I had stated at council, it would be Brent, you know, along with me, obviously, with Brendan Zach, who I work closely with, and he's doing the other grants. The mayor, of course, a council person, and then the finance director. Okay,
because I like your criteria that you outlaid this evening. I want to make sure that businesses that get the funds get that because they needed it, you know, that their business was affected by the pandemic in some degree, some fashion. And I like that you said that if they had already received funding, that they're scored in such a way that we give a higher score to somebody who hasn't received funding. So I like
John?
Yes.
Hi, it's Sue. I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you might be done, but I want to echo what you're saying. First of all, I love that our economic development director has worked on these programs and created these programs and put the thought into all of the programs that we're going to talk about, or at least maybe we're not talking about the others tonight, but that are targeted to those in need. But like you, I would like to know what kind of verification there will be that what is provided is accurate. And number 2, my only question is for this and all the programs, is there going to be a rubric? You talk about an internal committee and you've got these applications, but are you going to then be somehow using a rubric or in some way determining exactly what the greatest need is? Because we'd love to be able to support everybody, I'm sure, who has needs, but the city can't afford to do that. So thank you.
And yes, there'd have to be, if the program were approved, again, it would be based off the application, and then we could, I have not specifically assigned a scoring to each area category of the application, but that is something that I think it would behoove the committee to come to an agreement on as well. I don't want to, you know, because someone might have a suggestion that I didn't think of, so I don't want to sit here and dictate the whole program. The whole idea about having other people involved is so you hear other opinions and perspectives, and you bounce that back and forth when you're discussing applications.
Mm-hmm.
The verification is going to be harder than the rubric to come up with. I don't know if there's a central PPP, database.
Right, and I mean, obviously for profit and loss, that's why we went the finance director involved, at least for the financial part of the city, to confirm that. But yeah, some of it we're going to have to, you're hoping people are going to be honest. And if they have to show proof of everything else. So, and the PPE, there's not a central one, but, you know, if they receive, let's say they receive some kind of SBA funding, that you could find out. And so there are some things, but I mean, are we going to be able to cover every single thing? No, but again, that's why we'll have a committee. And if we have concerns, then I believe I even have somewhere in here to say, hey, you could be asked additional questions, or you might have to provide additional verification if we request it. At the end of the day, the city controls distributing this money.
Right.
And so, again, just because someone applies, that doesn't guarantee anything.
I might echo Sue Party's point that a rubric is a good idea. And that's something that I think on the committee level, once we would have that assembled, that we could discuss that. I think one of the things we would want to be cautious of is making sure that our rubric is objective. I've been involved in county grant programs, and I've observed where, you know, all the political infighting ends up being over what does the rubric look like, because it then predestines a certain outcome so that certain applicants then are scored higher than others. I hope, I mean, I would want to avoid that, of course, but at the same time, coming up with some kind of rubric so that we have some sort of objective standard by which we are evaluating these and then are able to meritoriously award them. I mean, one of the things we want to be sure of is that we're truly helping a business and making a difference for them. You know, if we give them money just so they close anyway, that's not really helpful.
Exactly. But
if we're making a difference with a business and it keeps them a going concern, and when we get through this thing, we know that we helped them and they're still here. Mm-hmm. That is a success.
Mm-hmm. Right. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
All right, is there any other questions or comments about this item? Okay, then I think we should move on to the next agenda item. Amended.
Can I ask one question though, Councilman? Sure. Yeah. So what is the process if it's in committee? Do you send it back with a recommendation, but to council, so it's back on the agenda, but it could be tabled until council's ready to make a decision? Or how does it work with the committee? Because I don't think we've ever referred anything out of this committee yet back to council, but it seems if we don't make some motion, then it's still in this committee. But it's more out of curiosity how it.
I guess I would be more comfortable seeing like where we can go with the rubric before making a recommendation back to council. And I don't know if that's this committee that's going to help generate that rubric, or if it's the administration provides that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I thought it would be more the committee once they convened after we established the program. The thing maybe that this committee could do is keep this in committee until we know we have the additional CARES Act money coming, and then we can assign at the committee level a recommendation for how much it should be funded, and then send it back to council with that.
And this committee should have a meeting exclusively about the rubric if it goes for that, because that's going to take a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm. It may be worth investigating some of the other cities that have similar programs and see if they have a published rubric or one that they're willing to share.
We can come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I believe some of these are even being handled on a rolling basis. So it's not even as if they may have already established a process and have already begun awarding funds to qualifying businesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sorry about that. My dog is being out of sorts today. Okay. So sounds like we're going to keep it in the committee. Mm-hmm. Mayor, would you or somebody from administration provide us with what that committee makeup would look like? Who would be on that specific selection committee?
Susan, would you prepare a proposal on that if we don't have that already?
Proposal of just the 5
Who the
people.
members would be?
Who would be on the committee? Is that in our proposal already? I don't recall.
Well, it was just me, you, Brendan, Dennis, and Councilman Rock. And if Councilman Rock was unavailable, then at least have one other council person.
As an alternate.
So
Sure.
a council person is part of the.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so the next
Confirm
agenda.
that then when we do that, when we come back, then if this program is going to move forward, we'll come back with committee and rubric.
Okay. Next agenda item is amended 2020-31, enacting codified ordinance section 280-04, entitled the public hearings notice. Who would like to address this agenda item?
This came out of council with Councilman Gould and
Yeah.
law director, and I thought Luke was going to be on the meeting.
Well,
Luke
yeah.
provided me some of his thoughts offline.
Yeah, Luke's at Newburgh tonight. Newburgh Council has a meeting and he's law director there, so
Okay.
he could not be here. Go ahead, John.
The only thing I got from Luke, well, he sent me an email, and I think he added this line, or I don't know if Kelly added this line, but under that 280-04 public hearings notice, the very last sentence, the very, very last paragraph of section 1, they added, I'm wondering if I could do a share screen. Let me see if that would make it easier. Is this working?
Well, unless you're allowed from the host.
Oh, you don't see it?
Did you host the meeting? It'll have to be enabled.
Oh.
Host.
Okay, now I lost my screen.
Oh, there, wait, now it's coming back.
Here we go.
Wait,
Something's coming.
I'm not good at this stuff. Okay. The last line was added, provided that the city has attempted in good faith to deliver notice hereunder. I'm not sure if he added that or not. He did have some angst on this proposed change in that it puts a burden on the city since there's already several layers of protection built into our codes for residents. That was his only concern. But I'll allow Councilman Gould to address what he would like to see changed on this. I think you provided something in that council meeting last week, correct?
Yeah, I think that this is a good start. What I would, so I'm seeing this for the first time. Sorry, John.
Okay.
So as I see this, this last line, the only concern that I have around this, so basically what this does is this, the original line that I wanted removed was the failure to deliver notice as provided in this section shall not invalidate the public hearing or any transfer, conveyance, sale, or disposition of property to the University Heights City Beautiful Corporation.
Okay, you wanted that move is what you're saying.
Yes. And the reason I wanted that removed was for the reasons I outlined in the council meeting, which is that I don't like the idea of having a requirement that then you invalidate later on in the same law. I think that that's just not a very good way to do business. And if we mean for it to be a requirement, it should be a requirement. And if what we're saying is it seems like a very hefty penalty to invalidate the conveyance and perhaps even stop a project that was underway because you missed notice, then let's build in a way to determine whether or not good faith has been provided. Good faith efforts have been made to make these notices. So in the event that, you know, we thought that notice had been given, but no attempt had been made to give notice, I do think we should come back and that this should be brought back to council, that all the council people should have an opportunity to hear from their constituents about concerns that they may have. But I do, give, weight to the idea that we don't want to blow up projects that were there. So what he's added is kept that entire sentence in and then added, provided that the city has attempted in good faith to deliver notice hereunder. And I'm fine with that. I think that that's a good balance. I would prefer to keep the mechanism that determines whether or not good faith has been given internal, rather than having a court interpret that for us. But I think that this is fine in terms of language.
If I can jump in, Councilman Gould, and I just want to understand, because if anything's being built on any particular property, or if anything's going to BZA, we already have, through the ordinances, that not just the adjacent property owners, I don't know the specific language, but there has to be notification done at all of those levels as well. So it's not as if property can be transferred and something built on and nobody ever gets notified. We have several processes in place now to notify. Just take the CIC out, just council's ordinances, and if anything is built on a property, adjacent property owners are notified. If anything goes to BZA for a variance, surrounding property owners are notified of a variance, and they are given opportunity to come to those meetings to speak, whether they're for or against a project. And I remember when this goes back to when we had council meetings in the actual council chambers. When I don't remember the case, but there were residents. Oh, it was about a swimming pool. And there were some residents saying, hey, we didn't even know about this. And council said, oh, wait a minute, you didn't know about it? You should have been notified. And they kicked the subject matter just because, to make sure people were notified. So I think the whole issue at the CIC was isolated, even though I don't necessarily agree that people weren't notified there, because we had public hearings about that property. We had several meetings about that property. Because the other thing too that I see a problem with is that because someone says, well, I wasn't notified, doesn't mean notice wasn't sent out. There are circumstances where people just don't pay attention until something's right there on their plate. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know, this happened or that was going to happen. Mm-hmm. So we do have, the city has notice provisions in place already. So that's why, is this just a matter of notifying just if property's simply transferred, or if we're actually going to do something on the property?
So you asked 3 questions. I'll take the second first. Okay. The second being, what happens if you don't receive the notice? And that's been the issue that we've kind of been juggling, which is, we do our best to send out notices. People don't listen. People don't check their mail. People, say they didn't get it when I know I put it there, because I remember having to walk up all those stairs and I almost slipped down them. And so what this does is creates a mechanism by which our good faith efforts to provide notice are sufficient to meet the requirements of this ordinance. I'll take the second, which is, why have an additional notice when we have so many other opportunities to provide notice? And you highlighted one instance where it got all the way to council without residents having any idea that a swimming pool was being built. Our residents want to know and be able to express to their council people their views, opinions, thoughts, desires, hopes, and dreams for their neighborhood prior to us transferring property out to CIC. And so if there's an empty lot next to a park and it's one of the only green spaces in a neighborhood, people want to know about that before it goes to CIC. And so this provides additional political cover to members of council from having angry residents come to them and say, why didn't you come and talk to me? Why didn't you give me any notice? Why didn't you let me know you were thinking of sending that property over to CIC? Now we've built into the CIC process now an almost identical notification requirement for residents. So now CIC cannot transfer property out to a private owner for development without providing notice to residents. This mechanism provides cover for members of council who may have a different opinion to CIC to give an additional stopgap for the project going forward. So this would give a notification requirement to council members to be able to hear resident concerns. And this is an example of the way that that would work differently would be the project that we had with the rain garden area. CIC, voted for that and probably would have voted for that because they thought it was a good project in the best interest of the city, had notification been given. But members of council who were not on CIC felt like that notification should be had before it even goes to CIC. So that's just those are the kind of responses to the three questions you asked.
Okay, but I just want to clarify one thing. Council did not fail to notify about the pool. My example was that some people came and said, "Oh, my neighbor got notification, but I didn't." Just an example, that some people claim they didn't get notification, but it doesn't mean the city didn't do it. But the thing with the CIC is council sent that land, that property to CIC. So every council member knew full well that that property was being transferred to CIC and that a house was planned on it because it was zoned, it is zoned R1. It is zoned.
But our residents did not.
But what I'm saying is there were several public meetings, first at the council level, then when it went to CIC, and it was discussed several times at CIC before it ever transferred over to Canez. So again,
yes, I think you're highlighting. I think you're highlighting the difference between a legal notice and a constructive notice. So that we had notices posted on the front of City Hall, that we had hearings or at least meetings with council before making the decision. You're right; those were all done in the public. That's very different to delivering a notice to our residents in the immediately affected area to have them come in and give their opinion. And frankly, I think that members of council assumed that had occurred. So, I'll let others on the committee or other members of council chime in on their thoughts and opinions on the notification requirement. But I think that there was some frustration to be put in the situation of having a group of residents so angrily come and say that they, wanted notice, and us agreeing like, yeah, you should have gotten notice. We thought you did. So that's why these two provisions I think are so important.
Well, there's a saying from law school: tough cases make bad law, and I feel like that is apropos here. The rain garden case is kind of a unique situation, and it remains that the rain garden is zoned for a single family home. And I feel like we may be, I take Luke's point that this place is a burden on the city, and there are other layers of protection, other layers of notice that will be provided, and in the instance of that particular home, or rather that particular piece of land, under existing ordinances and under the existing structures, development was avoided there. So if that was the appropriate outcome, that managed to occur. And, I think it's still debatable whether it was the appropriate outcome, but that's not really, why we're here today. But that said, one of the reasons we created a CIC was so that we could avoid, as a city, certain formalities that are placed on a city that aren't placed on a CIC. And we want to be able to develop in a precise, thoughtful, and nimble way. And we're now handcuffing ourselves at the CIC level recently, and now possibly at this level, to take instances where we could act nimbly to work with a developer and say, we'll have these meetings, we'll get this land over to you, and we'll get started. And instead, we are putting on additional layers of notice on top of the layers that already exist that slow down the process and slow down development, and in some instances would seem to do so to honor the wishes of people who live close to property but don't have an interest in property otherwise, and would have their view put forward to perhaps the detriment to the city at large. And we don't necessarily want to do that even if we provide them that notice. So the thing is that these provisions, I share Luke's concern and feel that they do place additional burden on the city unnecessarily and become a magnet for potential litigation as opposed to a way of alleviating residents' concerns. And I'm not sure that we should proceed with this at all with any of the language modifications. I feel like we've already got this at the CIC level, and we've already agreed at the CIC level that the CIC is not going to transfer property to a private developer without giving notice to the neighboring homeowners or occupants of land first. And this just slows things down further. And if we have, depending on the language we ultimately would agree on, language that somehow would cause a development to be torn down, property, a transaction unwound, that's a detriment to development in the city. That's a detriment to potential investment. And we shouldn't want to inject uncertainty to developers we want to work with. And mind you, these are developers that the CIC and, in essence, the city is choosing to work with. These aren't people that are coming in and trying to put something here we don't want. These are people that are trying to put something here that we do want. And we shouldn't put them in a position where if they work with us, they have extra risk towards having their development and their transaction unwound and their development raised. So I find that to be a real concern here. And I don't know that amending the last sentence will do enough to resolve that compared to simply not proceeding with this ordinance.
So Mayor, you don't want to proceed with the ordinance at all, but you're recommending.
I would prefer we did not.
I don't believe that asking our residents for their input and giving them an opportunity to provide that input prior to us transferring property to the outside corporation is a hindrance. I think that that's an appropriate part of the process. And if it slows development down to hear from our residents, I think that that's okay. I think that we would be in a different situation had we listened to those, given notification to those residents and listened to them prior to making the transfer. But politically, it puts you in a very difficult spot to have not given residents that notification and then have the transfer done. And then kind of, that is a handcuff. And if there's a detriment to our relationship with developers, certainly one could say that asking them to be kind enough to give us back our property and to not do their development would be just as much of a detriment as, or more of a detriment than asking our residents to be able to give their input. And that's what happened here. I appreciate your perspective, but I disagree with it.
Just to summarize this, that before council transfers anything to CIC, this ordinance is asking for notice, correct?
Correct.
And again, when it comes to CIC, there's a second notice, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And are you okay with this red line here, or
yes.
You are okay with this red line?
Yes.
Okay, so then depending on what the committee members here say, then it either goes to council for a vote, or not. I mean, I think that's, the goal tonight was to make sure that since you, Justin, wanted this ordinance created, that, we weren't doing iterations during a council meeting, we were doing it during committee meeting. So if you're okay with this, then the committee says, yes or no, it goes back onto the agenda at the next council meeting. Councilman Rock,
That's what, here's what this is saying. Before this gets transferred to the CIC, this is asking for notice for a public hearing, correct? And once it's in CIC, there's going to be a public hearing, but it's already in the CIC.
But it's asking for notice again in the CIC, because CIC has a separate,
notice
requirement.
It does seem a little redundant, but this is asking for the public hearing before it's transferred to the CIC.
But then there's another notice requirement in CIC also.
So is that one redundant? Because I would think it'd be more important to, well, no, because
the specifics aren't hashed out until CIC. So this is basically, John, this is really just for your, cover for you. I'm on CIC. So I hear everything. The residents can come to speak to me. I think that the council people exercise good judgment in CIC. You and Phil were in a very difficult situation because you had these residents coming to you saying, oh, I didn't have notice. My understanding was that many council people thought that notice was being given to these residents. And then you have angry residents coming to you saying, Phil, John, why did you send this to CIC who voted to do this thing? I still believe, like the mayor, that this project was in the best interest of the city as a whole. I voted to withdraw it because I believe that my citizens and my constituents should be heard prior to making those decisions. And I thought that notice was given when I made my initial vote. So I was resent vote and pulled it back. Now, if you as a council person who's not on CIC feel that it's redundant, I'll respect that, because I'm going to get notice and hear from residents in CIC. This was just providing additional cover for those members of council who were not there prior to the time that the decision has been made. As Susan points out, there will be another opportunity for council to hear from residents, but at that time, the transfer of property has already occurred from CIC to a private owner. Plans have been drawn, investments have been made in the property, surveys have been done, and then there's an investment already from that private individual. So,
may I say something?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Could I just say one thing? I don't really care about cover or anything else. I just think, frankly, it's really important when a city, a municipal government is turning over property to a private entity. It should be absolutely as transparent and clear as possible, because the last thing anyone ever wants is some suggestion that there was some kind of whatever people come up with, underhanded dealing or some kind of deal that was made that nobody had input into. If I am on city council and I am voting and agreeing that property should be turned over to a private entity for use, no matter how great the use is, and I think the CIC is wonderful and we're doing great things with it, I think it's critical to be as transparent as we absolutely possibly can. And I also can't believe most development can't wait an extra little bit of time for this kind of notice to be made. I also agree, we're talking about two different kinds of notice. The notice that the city is about to provide property to a private entity versus the notice that something is going up on that property. Those are two different things to me. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks for listening.
Okay.
Just a couple things, if I could jump in. So here's where I was getting at with this notice. So if council does a notice for a public hearing, all you would be doing as a body of council is saying, we're going to transfer this property to the CIC. And if there's a public hearing, people are going to say, well, what for? We can't tell you that right now. To who? We can't tell you that either right now. That's why I was saying that with the duplication of the services, I think it's key in CIC, absolutely. And there's a couple other things. So first, I think there should be for CIC, because that's when the transfer is. Prior to that transfer happening to the developer is the time then to say, now we can have a public hearing, because now we could say, here's the developer, here's what they're proposing to put on this property. And then you hear from the public, you have a public hearing in CIC, you close the public hearing, and then the CIC board then votes, do we transfer this property or not to the developer? Then let's say the property transfers. The other thing in CIC, what we do is before anyone can develop on any property, there is always a resident meeting that then is held. So Kness has had to hold a public hearing prior to starting construction on any, they had a hearing on every housing site. And the only one left now is once they're ready to move forward with the residential attached, even though we had public hearings at the school and that was all over council, they would have another public hearing where the surrounding neighbors are told then, okay, here's the actual development that's going to go up. That kind of that construction, pre-construction meeting that we've been having. So there's also that meeting. So I have no objection to residents being made aware of any development. I think that's crucial. I'm just, the delay in everything would be as if council set a public hearing just to simply transfer the property to the CIC. There's no other information you could disclose. Plus, all the council meeting, your agendas, everything's public anyway, so people are would see this property, but we can't tell them anything at that time. So maybe it's just the restrictions based at that level, just to say, hey, we're transferring property. But when it goes to CIC, we have now established nothing gets transferred without a public hearing prior to that vote. And I think that gives everybody coverage. Council members know you've transferred property to the CIC, so you know a vote is coming at the CIC. And so it just, that's where I was going with my questions, like, what are we trying to accomplish here when there's not a lot we can offer at this public hearing from council to CIC, other than at least just as another backstop to say, hey, here's a property that's being discussed. We can't give you many details, but be aware. Maybe something of that nature. I'm sorry?
I think that Justin wanted this
Mm-hmm.
created because there was a mistake made. Okay, let's just be real here. Okay, there was a mistake and it ended up backfiring on the city. I think many of us thought it was a good idea, on council thought it was a good idea to have a development there, and many of the neighbors did not. Okay, and there was a lot of backlash. Maybe there's a compromise here where they get notice, but no public hearing. Mm-hmm. And council is going to hear it anyways. They can come to that council meeting, and like Susan, like what you just said, let's take out the public hearing piece, and Justin, let me know if you're not okay with this, but keep the notice in there.
Oh, no, the public hearing that's referenced here is the council meeting. It's not a separate hearing.
Oh, so that has to be made more clear anyways.
I don't think that's
right,
what that's
but the point is what are you going to have at your public hearing? All you could tell people at that time is the city wants to transfer property at 2300 Warrensville Center Road.
Well, that's kind of inaccurate, Susan, because I think you'll recall when we did this transfer in the first place, we had more information in our council packet and had a discussion. I remember listening to Councilwoman Pardee speak eloquently about the property at the empty lot on the northwest corner of Silsby and Fenwick, which was initially part of the packet. Mm-hmm. And Councilman Rock came in and we knew, with the knowledge that a house was planned for these properties. We already had that information before council, before transferring to the CIC. And Councilman Rock brought some of his architectural knowledge. And what I'd really like to see here, at that corner property is a house that's respectful of that space, that had maybe I think you mentioned like a wraparound of something, or some type of design that was respectful of that space. And then we said, well, we really don't want anything that's not going to be grand and perfect for the northwest corner of that place, which is one of our only open places for just any old house. So I don't know if this is kind of jogging other council people's memory, but we had a detailed conversation about what was planned for these locations. We just didn't have plans for them. And so
you're right about that. I'll stand corrected on that. But then maybe the public hearing should be at council with the whole council body, and maybe we need to revisit CIC. The whole idea is what you know, it's just a lot of public hearings.
So I think that's a huge thing to correct here, because I did not intend by this to create a separate public hearing. The idea was simply to let people know, hey, this is coming to your council at our next council meeting. In 7 days, you have your council meeting, and this is coming, and your council will be talking about this at that. We'll be considering this. So
because it says here specifically, prior to any transfer sale of any city-owned real property and/or improvement to the University Heights City Beautiful Corporation, the city shall conduct a public hearing. So we need to revise that to say that these notices are going to the neighbors to let them know that there is a council meeting to address this transfer to the CIC. So it is not a public hearing. So we would, is that okay, Councilman Gould, that if we give notice to neighbors that there is a council meeting and that this is on the agenda?
Yes. I think that was, I believe that was Luke's intent, because that's what we had discussed all along. But so that's fine.
Yeah, I always read this. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd always read this as written. I always thought we were having a separate hearing, separate from a council meeting.
Okay.
Because that's what it says. And that was part of my heartburn here, was that we were going to be, you know, having a whole nother public hearing separate from a city council meeting. So if the council meeting's on October 1st, sometime before October 1st at 7, we're going to have a public meeting to have this discussion, and then we're going to go to council, and we're probably going to talk about it again. And the other thing about talking about all these things at the council meeting is that technically that's CIC stuff that CIC should be dealing with, because we don't want it to look like the city council or the city government is somehow evading or eluding the public bidding requirements that are required if a city makes a negotiation and a deal directly with a developer. That's why the CIC exists. When we were having those discussions about, well, I'm uncomfortable about this land and doing this, I was like, we shouldn't even really be talking about this here. That's really for the CIC. So,
well, that was,
but at the same time, that's kind of where the conversation went, because, you know, at the same time, how else do you do that? I mean,
but that was for the initial transfer. I mean, city council owned that, you know, the city owned those properties. So the council had to speak about that. But so if that is, okay, so if we change that wording, you know, maybe Justin, you can get back with Luke, and then is everybody you know, John, I guess, are we comfortable with bringing it back to council then?
If the wording's changed from public hearing to appear on the agenda at a council meeting, then I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if what we're talking about here is if the council meeting is, you know, October 7th, 7 days before the council meeting, we're notifying the adjacent property owners that the council meeting on the 7th, it's going to be on the agenda. That seems a lot less burdensome to me than what we were talking about before.
Okay.
And what I would suggest, Mayor, is even to maybe even reduce that administrative burden. You could plan the CIC, because usually we know that CIC meeting is coming up thereafter, and you could make that notice to comply with both of those. Like here's the CIC meeting that's coming up thereafter, where more details will be discussed, so that people already have that ahead of time. But that's just a suggestion. So I guess if we're gonna, so the suggestion is basically to ask Luke to modify the language herein to make it clear that what we're discussing is the council meeting where the issue will be addressed or will be considered, rather than a separate public hearing, and to keep the red line language as is, and to refer that to council as amended by the law director.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. We have to move on to the next agenda item, which is the home-based business legislation.
So item number 3. Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you going to vote on that then, John?
Do we need to vote on that, or are we just going to?
Yeah,
the amended changes, maybe the proposed changes.
Yeah, to get it back to council, there needs
to
what
all right, well then I'll make a motion to amend this ordinance 2020-31 to remove public hearings from the ordinance and replace it with appear on the agenda of a council meeting. I'd like to make a motion that this be amended and appear at the next council meeting. And it looks like Vice Mayor Weiss seconded that. So on our committee, we have Ms. Pardee, Mrs. Weiss, and myself. So I'll vote aye.
I vote aye, John.
Okay. Mrs. Weiss?
Yeah, aye.
Right. Okay. So we'll make that adjustment and it'll appear in the next meeting.
Awesome.
Okay. Next agenda item.
So item 3 and 5, the home-based business legislation and comprehensive zoning code update, those were just put to get back on your radar, not for discussion tonight. Those would both be items might need their own meetings, but it just, again, based on the small business assistance program and the calls I was receiving, and this is an issue I've had with trying to get home-based businesses to register. So I just wanted to put it back on your radar about the legislation that we should have a meeting that is dedicated to that. And this is updating what is already, we have a code, something in our ordinance now, but it's very weak and it is not enforced. So I just think it's something that the committee should discuss, or how do we proceed? And again, that was the amended proposal, was just to get discussion started. And I always find it easier to at least go off something that's already been written rather than just say, hey, let's talk about the subject without anything to use as a barometer. So so I just want to put that back on your radar, which is why it was on the agenda tonight.
Okay. One thing that we had talked about in the past was putting together an RFP before the end of the year for this is regarding the zoning code.
Yeah, that's number 5.
We have a draft one in house.
Yeah, so
you do? Okay.
I drafted it. The mayor was going to review it, and that's why I just wanted to put that back on your radar, so that when the committee is ready, then that would be something that would probably take its own meeting as well. That's lengthy as well. To put these 2 items together, it would be a very long night.
I'm sure it would. Also, we should put together who that steering committee is. The last time we did this review of the zoning code, it did die, but the committee existed of council members, the Board of Zoning Appeals, members from Planning Commission, ARB, a couple residents. So there was a makeup of not everybody from each of those boards, 1 or 2 representatives from each of those boards that made up a steering committee. So we would need, I would like to see a steering committee of a similar makeup.
Yeah, so that draft is completed.
Okay.
And then the only other agenda item would be number 4. Just wanted to give you an update that for the B.R. Knez construction sites, the Northwood is still under construction. Tullamore began construction, so that one is currently under construction as well. I went by, I think last week, it was just a hole in the ground, so I'm sure it looks a little different this week, but I haven't seen it yet. And then for Raymount and South Green, there's continued interest in those 2 sites. For the South Green property, the developer is completing a set of drawings to submit to ARB. And then for the South Taylor residential attached, they are working with their outside architects on drawings. And once their drawings are done, they will begin the approval process through the city. So once they start the approval process through the city, that's usually when we'd like to have a CIC meeting for the any pre-construction meeting for that site. So that would be the last site right now that the CIC was involved with that would need a public hearing at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you. Any other additions, comments, anything else to discuss?
That's all I had.
Okie doke. Well, I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting. It is 8:06 p.m.
Okay.
Seconded by Mrs. Weiss. I'll vote aye.
Aye. Good meeting. Thank you.
All right. Good seeing everyone. Thank you. I'm
Thank
glad
you,
everything
everyone.
worked out tonight. All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.